Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Let's start with Venezuela, because this is still hanging over everything like a low cloud. Yesterday, we talked about the shock and embarrassment inside Russia after the U.S. operation that removed Nicolas Maduro. Over the last 24 hours, that reaction hasn't cooled. It's matured. The initial outrage has given way to something more corrosive: comparison. Pro-Kremlin commentators and military bloggers are no longer just condemning Washington, they're openly revisiting Russia's own failed assumptions from 2022. The subtext is brutal. The U.S. executed a rapid decapitation operation thousands of miles from home. Russia, 4 years into Ukraine, is still grinding forward village by village. You're seeing a lot of "this is how it was supposed to go" commentary, which is not a healthy place for an authoritarian system that relies on confidence and inevitability. What's new today is how carefully the Kremlin is compartmentalizing this. Publicly, Russia is backing Venezuela's interim leadership and denouncing U.S. neocolonialism. Privately, it's doing everything possible to keep this from bleeding into talks with Washington over Ukraine. Putin remains silent. That's not absence, that's control. Russia clearly doesn't want Venezuela to become the excuse for the U.S. to harden its position or walk away from negotiations. Ukraine still outranks every other theater for Moscow, and Venezuela, humiliating as it is being treated as a strategic distraction rather than a cause for escalation. At the same time, Russia is making sure the world doesn't confuse diplomatic restraint with military pause. Compared to yesterday's reporting on Russian strikes, today's update is narrower, but still telling. Russia launched another overnight wave of drones into Ukraine, smaller than some of the massive barrages we've seen recently, but still focused on energy infrastructure and rear areas. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted most of them, but several got through. The pattern hasn't changed: sustained pressure, winter conditions, civilian hardship. It's the same coercive playbook, just applied relentlessly. What has changed, though, is Ukraine's response. Yesterday, we talked about deep strikes into Russia as a trend. Today, we've got clearer confirmation and consequences. Ukrainian long-range drones struck a major Russian missile and artillery arsenal in the Kostroma region, deep inside Russia, far from the front. This wasn't symbolic. This facility feeds ammunition into Russia's central military districts, including units supporting operations in Ukraine. Secondary explosions went on for hours. Local authorities opened evacuation points, and the familiar drone debris narrative got rolled out again. When you hear that line now, it's basically the geopolitical equivalent of "nothing to see here," and no one is buying it anymore. In parallel, Ukraine hit a large oil depot in Lipetsk, igniting fires and disrupting fuel storage for multiple Russian regions. This builds directly on what we discussed yesterday about Ukraine targeting Russia's industrial and logistical bottlenecks. The repetition matters. Kyiv isn't just proving it can hit deep, it's showing it can do it again and again and again. That's a very different kind of pressure than a one-off spectacular strike. On the battlefield inside Ukraine, the picture is one of continuity, with slight adjustments. Russian forces have made small advances near Seversk and south of Huliai-Pol. Nothing dramatic, no breakthroughs, but steady forward movement at high cost. Around Pokrovsk and Mirnorod, Russia is leaning even harder into infiltration tactics. Motorcycles, buggies, small assault teams probing Ukrainian lines. This is an evolution we hinted at yesterday. Today, it's clearly the dominant approach in that sector. Ukrainian forces responded with precision strikes, including HIMARS attacks on Russian troops and vehicles moving along key supply routes. Russian aviation has increased airstrikes in response, which suggests Moscow is compensating for stalled ground momentum with air power. Inside Ukraine's leadership, yesterday's reshuffle is now clearer in intent. The reassignment of the SBU chief wasn't a demotion, it was a refocus. Ukraine is explicitly separating its wartime governance track from its asymmetric warfare track. The people best at sabotage, deep strikes, and covert operations are being concentrated on exactly that mission. That aligns perfectly with what we're seeing on the ground and inside Russia. Ukraine is preparing for talks to fail without saying it out loud. Zooming out, the European dimension is getting more serious by the day. Yesterday, we mentioned growing concern about Russian hybrid activity. Today, that concern has hardened into formal warning. German military assessments now explicitly state that Russia is conducting covert attacks against German infrastructure. Cyber operations, sabotage, influence efforts as preparation for a potential future conflict with NATO. Germany is being treated as a priority target because it's the alliance's logistics backbone. This isn't about panic, it's about pattern recognition. This is classic pre-conflict behavior, updated for fiber optic cables and energy grids instead of rail yards and radio towers. And while Europe is digesting that, Russia is juggling another escalation at sea. Building on yesterday's Venezuela story, Russia has now sent naval assets, including a submarine, to escort an oil tanker pursued by the U.S. Coast Guard for sanctions violations. The tanker re-registered under the Russian flag mid-transit and is heading toward northern waters. This is new. Russia is putting military hardware between U.S. enforcement actions and the shadow energy trade that's helping keep its economy afloat. It's not a crisis yet, but it's a deliberate signal. Moscow is willing to raise the stakes to protect its sanctions evasion networks. Finally, Russia's activity in Africa continues to expand, and this is an update worth flagging. Arms deliveries to Madagascar, overseen by senior Russian military intelligence figures, aren't just about bilateral relations. Madagascar sits astride critical Indian Ocean shipping routes. This fits neatly into Russia's broader strategy of building influence nodes outside Europe, places that offer access, leverage, and alternatives if pressure tightens elsewhere. It's the same model Russia has used before, just applied to a new map. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the RH community. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribing, leaving a quick 5-star review, or sharing it with someone you know makes a huge difference. It's how this network will grow. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on the Middle East and the DPRK. This is free for Substack subscribers. Starting January 16th, new Substack subscribers will move to a paid model. If you're already subscribed on Substack before then, nothing changes. You'll keep full access to everything, free forever. New subscribers after January 15th will receive the daily written brief, weekly deep dives on economics, sanctions, and more for a monthly fee. So if you're not on Substack yet, don't worry. Just head to restrictedhandling.com and subscribe now for free and get the content free forever.